Okay, Dad, today is Monday, September 16th, and I want to start this episode off by actually going back in time a little bit to the Istanbul Agreement that was reached in April of 2022. And so this agreement was something that uh, was reached between Ukraine and Russia, Zelensky and Putin, that would have ensured that Ukraine gets to keep all of its territory, minus Crimea, and that they would just agree to neutrality and give some basic rights to the ethnic Russians. It sounded like everything was good. It was fine. And then Boris Johnson came in and scuttled that deal. And I was just thinking about it last night. I'm like, what could have Boris Johnson have said to destroy this deal? Do we have any idea what guarantees were given to Zelensky? Because if we think about it, this whole thing could have been avoided. Now we
Hmm.
are hundreds of thousands of people dead later, and the country is destroyed. NATO's falling apart. Europe's in crisis. The U.S. is in crisis. This whole thing was avoided, and for some reason, we destroyed, blew up this deal. And I'm wondering, what was the calculation? What was the promise that Zelensky was given? And why hasn't there, when things started to go bad, why wasn't there an attempt to, you know, revive this deal?
Well, yeah, maybe I'll just go back to, how I first became aware of the deal. I remember I heard talk of it way back then in March and April of 2022, and that, a deal had been reached. And then I remember the Russians actually withdrew from Kiev, which was, they said, is a goodwill gesture. And to be honest, I wasn't even really very sure about that. I didn't know that if there really was a deal, and I thought, well, maybe this is just a way of the Russians have a spinning this decision to retreat. Of course, in the West, it was described as some sort of major defeat of the Battle of Kiev, which never really existed, But that's part of the kind of the lore, the war lore on the Western side, that there was a Battle of Kiev and the Russians were defeated and forced to withdraw. But no, apparently they did it again because they thought they had a deal. Now, yeah, you say it was Boris Johnson. That's what most people say, that like he was the one who came in. But if it was Boris Johnson that ended the deal, it wasn't really it was because he was speaking not just for his own government, but for the U.S. government as well, and through them all of NATO. So like when he came to talk to Zelensky, Zelensky understood that he was representing really all of NATO. And what I've heard is that basically he said that you can win this war and we'll give you, the means to do it. The Russians our intelligence tells us that they're weak. They proved themselves to be a paper tiger, and now it's time to tear them up. And you'll be a hero. You'll be the Churchill of Ukraine. And of course, Boris Johnson imagined himself like the reincarnation of Churchill in England. And that's apparently what happened. And, since then, it wasn't really the best time, let's say, to have, it would have been even better, of course, if NATO and the U.S. in particular had responded to Russia's offers to negotiate a new security architecture before the war. It would never have begun, and that would have been the best time to do it. This deal, I've heard it argued, and I think this may be true, that it wasn't, it was a draft and it had been initialed. It wasn't signed and sealed, but they had obviously made progress. But there were doubters on both sides, and I think like even within Ukraine and within Russia, a lot of the Russians were actually angered by the deal. Again, is mostly on the nationalist side, that felt like Putin was giving up too much, and that he shouldn't trust the Ukrainians. They'd already burned him on the Minsk agreements, right? The West, and they said that So there was actually real pressure on the Russian side to just pull out of the deal, but there was, in the end, it was it was Zelensky, because of what he had been told by Boris Johnson. So he went in, he had this promise. He said, well, look, this is the most powerful military alliance in the world has ever seen, and they're telling me that I can win. I'd be a fool not to do this, right? Of course, he
Well,
was a fool to do it.
well, not really. I mean, like the agreement would be that they get to keep the Donbass, all the Ukraine essentially, and they can preserve their state, and they can be neutral and prosperous, play both sides.
Sure.
Obviously, it's a good deal for Ukraine.
Yeah.
But what was it that?
Well, he would have to give up Crimea, right? As he pointed out.
Yeah, but of
then-
course,
and then
there's
also-
no way Crimea
right.
was ever going. I mean,
Yeah,
anybody
I
that
think
was
that's
realistic.
right. Yeah, maybe in his mind it was possible. And then the other thing was, no, that's a good point. The other is that the Ukraine would basically have to demilitarize, and that they would not be allowed to have, a full army. They would have to reduce their military forces substantially. But again, if you're I think that would have been a very good move. I mean, to be kind of a neutral country with minimal, with no worries about your borders, and I'm sure the Russians, would have kept it, and with minimal military forces, it would have been a chance for Ukraine to really prosper. Of course, it was, but the nationalists, again, you can't see the Azov Brigade or accepting that. I imagine that was a vulnerable point on his side. You'd have to dismantle these brigades. I think, I'm not sure if there were provisions. I imagine that there were provisions about, in particular, deinstitutionalizing the Banderites, and military units such as the Azov Brigade. That would, again, that was already was very much a danger that Zelensky had to be aware of. He couldn't, it was very risky crossing these guys. I think he would only be willing to risk it if he had the support of NATO. If NATO made it crystal clear, hey, we're with you, we're standing behind you on this, go ahead and do it, and we'll support you in every way we can. But he didn't have that support. So it was a risky move to go trust the Russians and be exposed to attacks from your, the nationalist, your nationalist flank. That's what would have happened to him.
Right, but kind of the story goes that this deal most likely would have gone through if it wasn't for the United States and Boris Johnson scuttling it. Right.
Yeah.
So
I guess we can't really know exactly what in the end, they were the ones who scuttled it.
Right.
That's not just something that the Russians said. I remember it was just in the months afterwards, different people came out who had been involved in the investigation, not the investigation, but the negotiations. People like, I think there was the Turkish foreign minister, Naftali Bennett from Israel, some actually high-ranking, I believe they're like ex-NATO officials that were there, like from Austria or Germany, and they said, yeah, this is what happened. So, maybe, we can't be sure that this agreement would have held together. Again, it was a draft. It was initial. There were pressures all around to tear it up. But the fact is, it was Boris Johnson representing, the U.S. and the Western powers that scuttled it.
Right. So I'm wondering, what is it that Boris Johnson and the West promised Zelensky in Ukraine? I mean, why?
Well, I think it's what we've been hearing. We're totally committed to you. We'll give you everything you need to win this war, and again, I think it was a huge, probably the Americans, the British believed their own words. They thought the Russians were weak, just like they thought the Russian economy was very fragile. They thought that the whole place was going to fall apart, that it wouldn't take too much to just bring about the collapse of Russia.
Yeah, I'm wondering if there's some other angle there. I don't know if you've heard stuff about BlackRock, for example, getting contracts to rebuild Ukraine after the war, and I wonder if this has some play. Is there some kind of corporate colonization going on with this? I mean, I know it sounds kind of crazy, but I think it's true, right? That
no, it's not crazy. I guess you can't. I tend to overlook the monetary motives. But you can't. A lot of these people, these politicians are corrupt, and, they love power, but they also love money. And I'm sure I wouldn't be surprised that it was a factor. I don't think it explains the whole thing. I think it was really basically, American hubris, and, just the sense that, we rule the world, and again, if let's say the Americans, NATO let Zelensky go ahead and make this deal with the Russians, that would be it would be looked upon as a victory for the Russians and a defeat, a kind of a failure on the part of NATO. It's just that I think that's the way a lot of people would look at it. It's just like, oh, okay, maybe they blinked. They're afraid of the Russians. And it would also mean that they would essentially lose Ukraine. I mean, they had Ukraine and they wanted to use it as just a kind of an anti-Russia base, as a battering ram, whether through war or other means. They had their bases there already. Remember the 14 CIA bases that they were using to destabilize, to launch special operations into Russia and to monitor and surveil. They didn't want to give that all up, right? And Ukraine was, you could say it's more than a pawn because it's such a huge country. It was one of the major pieces on the geopolitical, chessboard for them. And if this agreement went through, it would mean that, okay, well, the Russians don't own it, but we don't own it either. And that's not, we own it now. We're giving something up. And they just can't do that. The hegemon just can't do that. That's the thing. I think that's part of their thinking.
So really the problem is just, if we just go back even further, is just that the West has decided that Russia's the enemy and that we're going to have this sort of containment policy for Russia. And then that's really just where it comes down to at the end of the day. It's just that they declared Russia after the collapse of the Soviet Union to still be the enemy, even though we won the Cold War. There was no reason to continue this. We could have formed some type of relationship. Yeah. There's even talks of Russia joining NATO in the 90s, and now we decided that no, we can't. Russia's the bad guy, and just that policy has pushed us to where we are now. And that's pretty much it, right?
Yeah, well, and I think it's important to point out that Jeffrey Sachs, who was intimately involved in the Russian government in its early years after the fall of the Soviet Union, points this out, that there was clearly there was hostility within, even then, directed against the Russian government that you didn't find against any of the Eastern Europeans. So he could not get the cooperation from the West when it came to implementing macroeconomic policies in Russia that he could get in, let's say, for example, Poland. They would, immediately come up with $1 billion or whatever. And then in the case of Russia, we can't do this. And he realized there was something wrong. There was something that, there was this anti-Russian bias that existed even after the fall of the Soviet Union. It never died. And it just, it continued to grow.
Yeah, the reason I brought up this whole Istanbul thing is because I was just lying in bed last night and thinking, why are the Brits so gung-ho on supporting Ukraine? They're willing to send in their Storm Shadows and perhaps even go at it alone, because we were talking about the long-distance missiles. It seems like it's been shut down by the U.S., but Britain is really upset. They really wanted to do this, and it seems like they still do, and maybe they'll get their way. And I'm like, well, why did they have such a bee in their bonnet about this? And I was thinking, well, maybe it's because Boris Johnson and the Brits were over there in Ukraine, and they are the ones that put their voice on the line, their reputation on the line. I mean, obviously the U.S. and the rest did, but it was Boris Johnson himself that was probably talking to Zelensky and saying, don't sign this peace deal. We promise you that you will win no matter what. We got your back 100%, no matter what. And so there's probably more pressure in the UK to make it happen. And the US is just so far removed. We got an ocean between us. Biden probably doesn't even remember the whole Ukraine situation. Anyways, at this state, obviously he does, but you know what I mean?
Biden, that's like one of the few things he was probably aware of, that he knows. Yeah, he's been intimately involved in Ukraine, as we know, going back many, many years, and he himself has a bee in his bonnet about Russia. I don't think he's really any different from Boris Johnson. Yeah, if anything, the anti-Russian hatred is greater in Britain, but you find a lot of it, within the State Department in the U.S. too.
But I wonder if that's why. This there's so much pressure to keep escalating, and that we keep on escalating, even though when we know that clearly this isn't going to solve the problem in these long range missile attacks. It's like there is really no solution to win this war unless you can go all out, bring all of NATO in. But it seems like, the US and the UK have just promised so vehemently to the Ukrainians that they will win this war, and no matter what, and that we got their back no matter what. And I think that's just really the pressure that keeps on, making us do these stupid moves to keep on going forward, right? And I think that's why you see it more from the US and UK, and then we're seeing other countries like, France and Germany. Everybody went along with the beginning, but they weren't as intimately involved with the promises of a Ukrainian victory as the United States and the UK. Is that pretty much accurate, do you think? And that's why we're in the situation we are now.
Yeah,
it's just,
right.
I'm trying to understand why we, why we can't be rational and just look at.
Yeah, well, I think it just goes back to this hegemonic thinking. You just can't, you can't have another rival. You're not the, you're not the supreme power of the land, the world's hegemon. As long as there is a Russia and it's attacked and it's strong, and and it's not, and it's most importantly is sovereign, independent. It doesn't simply bend to your will. So, the problem is Russia. The problem is China, just because they're there, and to a lesser extent Iran. And, again, in the past, we had a different kind of thinking. During the Cold War, there was, we accepted that there was a rival to our power. There was another superpower on the planet. And so we, in fact, welcomed neutral countries. I mean, that was the thinking of Eisenhower, for example. Austria chose to be neutral, and he said, good. That actually just reduces tensions and makes he was all in favor of it. And I think very foolishly, we have abandoned that way of thinking that actually served us very well and served the countries involved. I mean, these countries that were neutral during the Cold War did very well. They prospered, and both sides respected. There's really no reason to think that Russia wouldn't respect Ukraine's neutrality. The danger is that we wouldn't respect it. I mean, that's that's been the recent history. But we're hegemons, and so now I think that largely explains why Boris Johnson went and told him this. It's just that we really couldn't see this deal take place because it would mean a loss for us. We had this piece on the again on the geopolitical chessboard, and if this deal went through, we would lose it. It wouldn't be that we lose it to the other side, but it's no longer ours. And that's just something that's that the neocons can't accept. The revolution is always supposed to be going forward. We can't stop and admit our limits. And then, well, we miscalculated. It turned out the Russians were a lot stronger than we thought. And they've become stronger and stronger. Just today, Putin announced that the Russian army was going to be expanded to 2.4 million. So it's much larger, it's much better equipped, it's much better trained, it's much more experienced. And at every level, it's a much stronger army than it was at the beginning of this war. So we miscalculated terribly, right? But we just simply can't admit it. It was at this point, if we just throw in the towel, it's even worse than if we had accepted the Istanbul Agreement back in 2022. And the defeat just is very obvious. You see that, okay, we gave it everything we had and we couldn't do it. We lost essentially. Again, you maybe can try to spin it as a victory, but it's just not. It's going to look like a loss to much of the world, and that's the way that they themselves see it. I mean, I think it was Boris Johnson himself who said about a month or two ago that basically Western hegemony is on the line here. For them, it's an existential question. So they're not thinking rationally. Just they're in a state of panic because they see that they've failed. So they're engaging in these escalations. It really won't do anything, but it's just sort of. If you simply stop and say, hey, we can't do anything, at that point you've admitted we lost. And they just can't admit it to themselves. So they do something which is foolish, it's reckless, it doesn't help, but it makes them imagine that there is still some reason to hope. There's some reason to believe. It's just, again, a matter of, I think they need to fool themselves more than anything else at this point, to deceive themselves into thinking there's a chance for victory.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, the American empire is over now, or American hegemony is over, and I think just most people haven't realized it yet. But that's really the big outcome of this war, and it's happening. It's already happened, and the more that we try to preserve it, the greater the fall of our hegemony is going to be, the greater fall of the empire. Well, why do you think it's so damn important for people like Boris Johnson to have the hegemon? Like, why? Like, I don't understand that desire. Like, well, why shouldn't you just be like, I want to be the best country I can be? You know, like I can.
Right.
I want to be better than France in football and education and you know that type of competition, that rivalry. That's what you want to do.
Right.
What's the deal that no, we got to control the world and we have to have the like, I don't understand that.
I think it's I think it is just it's kind of the shadow or the of the British Empire. You know, one time, as they said, the sun never set on the British Empire because they had colonies all around the world, and that's all gone. It was a huge blow, and you know, obviously the thing to do is to just accept it and say, okay, well that was then, this is now. You know, we can still be, you know, as we pointed out, like the Netherlands actually, you know, did have something of an empire. You know, it had quite a few colonies overseas, but it retired from its imperial venture in a much more graceful way. And it's a very livable, prosperous country. There's no reason why you can't have a very nice country, right? Without you don't have to have an empire. But it just seems there are people in the British ruling class, the political class, that just can't give that up. I mean, that it's just a part of their identity, and it's, you know, much more than actually, you know, deliver on their promises for a better life to their constituents. They want to be, they want to relive World War II or something. They want to be the next Churchill, and that's just absurd. You know, you're now just you're a puny little country with a lot of, well, not puny, but you know, a relatively small country with beset by many serious problems, social and economic problems. It's time to just give that dream up, you know, forget all about that. But they can't. I mean, I guess there's just something, you know, it appeals to their egos, and it is irrational, but it just clearly is there. I mean, they have this obsession. It's not helping them. Look, you know, like people pointed out, they very gladly, I think it was their foreign minister, Lammy, went over and declared, you know, we got giving so many more hundreds of millions of pounds to Kiev. And just then they had cut like heating subsidies to their own people. They haven't even stopped to think about. They don't even seem to. Clearly, they're not embarrassed about it. This is the Labour government too. Right? They're supposed to care about this kind of things, but they still have this obsession. I mean, it's just this imperial obsession that they can't let go of.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. And I feel like maybe the Brits have been living through the United States vicariously. Yeah. They're like, oh, well, they're the old grandpa, and this is the United States is their strapping young grandson that's now taking over the empire for them.
We're gonna provide them. Yeah, we're gonna show them how to do it. You know, we're gonna, you know, we'll lead the way. You know, they've got the. You know, obviously they got the muscle, but we've got the wisdom and the know-how, and you know,
Right. Yeah, no, it makes sense. You know, I've just been kind of just trying to think about the mindset of the leaders, and specifically in the UK and the United States, because that's where the concept of Western hegemony is just so strong. You know, it's not as big of a deal in places like France and Germany. They've always been kind of second to, you know, the US and UK have that special relationship, and everybody
the French have their. You know, they too had the sort of, it wasn't, you know, a far-flung colonial empire, but they were the greatest power in Europe at one time. And they still seem to, you know, people like Macron seem to harken back to Napoleon. They want to somehow bring that all back. They haven't really forgotten that either. So there's a similar kind of
there's a complex with everybody.
Yeah.
Except for the Germans, because of what happened in the last one. They're like, whoa, we won't talk about
World
War II.
Yeah, the defeat was so utter, so total that it just, you don't find that in Germany.
Yeah. It's, I just find it interesting just trying to think about what makes these people tick and why we keep on throwing good money after bad on these projects. But I think it's true. It's a lot of just ego and built on previous history and just trying to maintain that empire, and that it doesn't make any sense. I hope these nationalist movements gain more strength, and they seem to be. Even in the United States, the America First movement, and we're seeing with the rise of the AfD, and in Germany, the idea like, hey, let's take care of Germany, let's take care of France.
And
so much better.
It's important to point out. Yeah, it's not all populist right. It's also, you do find it on the left, like Mélenchon and his party, the Unbowed, and the Left Party in Germany, and then in Slovakia.
Right.
It's largely on the whole, it's on the right, but not entirely. And there's some very important exceptions. I think it's important to point out because it's always, this desire for making peace with Russia is always described as far right, which just seems so utterly ridiculous to me. And
I thought peace
again,
was
those exceptions show that it's not true. But then, but then you even have people claiming that Søren Wagenknecht is actually far right or something. But then, what does far right mean? You want to have? When I was young, it was like the people who wanted to make peace deals with the Soviet Union. They certainly weren't the far right, and we didn't call them the far. They were mainstream liberals and a lot of mainstream conservatives too, and just sensible people. That just want to adapt to realities. That's what it was. It's not some sort of far right ideological obsession. It's quite the opposite. It's the lack of an obsession. It's an acceptance of reality.
Right. I mean, we see that here. The whole Trump saying that he wants to end the war in Ukraine, so people automatically attach the idea of making any type of peace deal with Russia is somehow supporting Trump, and you're
supporting Putin and whatever.
Yeah, supporting Putin. You're a far right extremist. We had this assassination attempt on Trump the other day. It's a perfect example. This person was a very rabid Ukrainian supporter. I think he went to Ukraine. There was even an interview with him on Newsweek that I was seeing
and also in the New York Times. He appeared in a New York Times article.
Okay,
so he was a major mover in the support Ukraine movement. Yeah, he spent several months there. He also appeared in an Azov Brigade propaganda video. Actually appeared rather prominently in that. So, I mean, yeah, he's right in the thick of things. He's not just some guy with, some keyboard warrior in a basement. He went out there and tried to recruit. I don't think he was very successful, but he was very active and continued to be, I guess, up until the end. He's been, at least online, he's been posting pro-Ukraine and a lot of anti-Trump stuff too. Even anti-Tulsi Gabbard. I saw one of his tweets. He was calling her an idiot.
Yeah, I mean, it just shows you the power of narrative and how dangerous it is when the mainstream just tries to demonize the other side completely and totally. Then you get these rise of these extremists and people that are being rational, which I believe we are. We are proponents for peace. We don't want war. Then you get regarded as an enemy and a danger to this, what they have built in their mind as a black and white battle between good and evil, that there is no nuance in these conflicts. And this is what we get. We get to the rise of this, and you lay it at the feet of our media and our government, right? This is the outcome of this.
Uh-huh. Yeah. Well, yeah, clearly, I think the great majority of Americans, are not deeply committed to the Ukrainian cause, but there's obviously a minority that is passionately committed to it, and who with the consequences of this attempted assassination recently.
Have you seen how the media has responded to this attempted assassination?
Well,
Do they talk about his Ukrainian involvement? Or?
Yeah, actually, the coverage of this seems to be much more reasonable and fair than the initial coverage of the first Trump assassination attempt. Remember, like, popping sounds.
Number 2 already. We're already on the second.
Yeah, right. But I just remember, like, the first stories that came out, popping sounds, heard at, or Trump falls down and leaves stage early or something. Right. They just didn't want to even admit that there had been an assassination attempt. They couldn't even say an apparent assassination attempt in the headline. But this has been, at the start, they said this appears to be an assassination attempt. And I was just looking at the New York Times story this morning. And they had to, because they actually had him, they interviewed him in one of their stories about support for Ukraine during the early months of the war. So they said, yeah, he clearly was passionately devoted to Ukraine. That seemed to be his main cause. So, I think we're safe in assuming that that's what motivated his assassination attempt.
Okay. All right. Well, is there anything else we want to talk about regarding this assassination attempt or what's happening in Ukraine, or would you like?
Well,
to
I thought maybe kind of that that this ties in pretty well. The recent attack really on RT. I think it shows what we're talking about is we have a government of ideologues. That's the thing, is that we are ruled by people that have this. It's an ideology of hegemony, an ideology of American exceptionalism. I think that's like the best way to describe it. And RT, it's clear that they regard it as a real threat. They're claiming that somehow they were an espionage arm. I don't believe it. I haven't seen any real evidence for that. It seems clear to me that they are actually afraid of RT because they see that they're losing the global South, and they want to. I think probably RT has played a role in just providing information, but I think it's only the problem is that we're on the wrong side, of these conflicts, and and it's clear to much of the world. If you're not part of this, this Western community of nations, you step back and you look at what's happening in Gaza and what's happening in Ukraine. You don't see what the ideologues version of these wars, and so yeah, they are drifting away from us. They are, criticism of the U.S. is growing, and we can't really understand that, I think it's just in their fevered minds. It has to be that this is again some sort of diabolical Russian plot, and they go after RT. It's not going to help them. It's probably going to hurt them. The world sees them going after RT. Again, this defender of press freedoms, it really once again. I think strikes home to me, personally, how much the U.S. has changed. I remember growing up, when I first became aware of the news and following it, I was aware that Russia had these news agencies, Pravda and TASS, and nobody was afraid of anything that they said. It tended to be kind of a joke because we were very confident that we had a better system. And I think by and large, we really did. And we didn't need to, go after, try to shut down their news organs and keep people from hearing them. We let it because we thought, in an open debate, we win. And that was the attitude. But it's changed now. I think it's clear that there's a real fear. The problem is we're on the wrong side, and we are grasping some ideas that are false. We've made these commitments that are clearly wrong and dangerous, and to really corrupt, this corrupt regime, for example, a commitment to Ukraine that's Banderite and corrupt, beyond description, really. And then, of course, the Netanyahu, the genocidal Netanyahu government. We're on the wrong side. And so, when you really are on the wrong side and you are doing things that contradict your own proclaimed values, what you lose in an open exchange. So it becomes, we're circling the wagons and trying to suppress opposition views, trying to suppress dissidents. We are behaving more and more, like the Soviets of old did.
Right, and you touched on this in the last episode as well, but it is kind of scary because, you have two paths you can take. You can kind of admit that you're wrong and open up and recover, or you have to circle the wagons tighter, and we start to descend more and more into this dystopian nightmare where the powers, they have to control the narrative more and more tightly, which is what's happening now. And like you're saying, we're going after RT. We can't. I saw that they told India basically, don't allow RT to be published, broadcast in your country in India because they are, a propaganda network machine. Listen to our side.
Yeah,
our
well,
story.
they're claiming.
That's
well, they're also claiming espionage. I think that was a calculated move. First of all, to scare away people from cooperating in any way with, like within this country, with cooperating with RT, because you could possibly, be subject to, anti-espionage laws in this country. So it just makes it gives them more legal weapons to go after people that actually appear on RT. Yeah, and the same in other countries. But India has again declared that, look, we're not a vassal state. We are an independent country. Right.
Yeah, I think that's something that it's hard for people to see and realize that, we've hitched our wagons to apocalyptic horses, the Zelensky horse and the Netanyahu horse we're both clearly here now in the wrong if anybody's paying close attention to what's happening and not just watching the mainstream media. And as these horses are dragging our wagons closer and closer to destruction, we have to control the narrative even more and more. And, how far will it go? It does get scary. We'll see there is a pushback. We have a real battle going on right now just within the marketplace of ideas right now. Can the free marketplace of ideas win out and defeat the central propaganda narrative machine of the Western powers or not? And how far will they go to, destroy civil liberties across the Western world? I know. What do you think? Who's going to win this this war?
Yeah. Well, you mean between
just the idea that you have the states that are trying to control the narrative, and then you have the free speech side on the other side. Like, will there be a further clampdown? Because we've seen.
Yeah,
Pavel Durov of Telegram got arrested.
Right,
RT, we're seeing more and more attempts to control the narrative and control the speech.
Yeah. I think, that's going to continue. We are going to see more clampdowns. How successful they're going to be is another question. Just the nature of technology makes it much more difficult to carry out. But it's there. We know it's there. And they can do damage. They can shut down channels. They can deplatform people. It happens, and the consequences are real for those people involved. There's. I think they're bound to lose, but they're going to keep on fighting this war. And I think the clampdowns will continue and probably intensify.
Right. Well, if we ever get shut down, then we know that we're in big trouble because we're such a small channel. And if we've gone this far, then it's like,
right.
Then it's time to start to prep.
Okay. I'll start digging the hole in my backyard.
Right. To get into your bunker. Okay, well, let's move over to the Middle East a little bit. So I don't know if you saw this. This is pretty breaking news that I just heard earlier this morning from Alistair Crook, that the Israeli Defense Minister Yoav Gallant is being fired. Is getting sacked. I don't know. Okay. So I guess you haven't heard this yet. And
I haven't heard this. I had heard something. Maybe that was preliminary to this, that Netanyahu and his people were getting fed up with the IDF, I guess for dragging their feet. I think they probably, if they had their druthers, the IDF would be in Lebanon already.
Right.
It's not. I don't think the IDF openly disobeyed, but they just keep on dragging their feet and say, "Oh, we got to first do this, got to first do that," and that's probably that's probably why he's gone. You know, they're going to get somebody who just more
I'm not
obedient.
100%. I think they're in the process of it. I think this is like they're
All right.
having this. I'm not 100% sure, but from what I understand is that Yoav Gallant is out, and this new person from the Knesset, Gideon Sar. I don't know if you know who he is.
No, I don't.
He's coming in. Well, basically, from my understanding with Gideon Sar is that his whole deal is that anybody that attacks Israel, their punishment is they lose territory, and that we're going into southern Lebanon. And it sounds like that kind of just what we're saying, that Netanyahu wants this done. And so, of course, when you look at it, it's like, oh, well, of course, if Israel attacks other countries, it doesn't mean anything that Israel ever lose territory. It's if they respond, and then we'll go in and we'll take, parts of Syria and more parts of Lebanon and probably all of Gaza and the West Bank is the idea. But the other thing as well that Alistair Cook brought up that we've talked about before is there are certain deadlines that Alistair Cook was saying there's approximately 3 weeks, maybe a month left of decent weather for the Air Force to conduct what it's going to do, to be able to conduct operations effectively.
Right.
So, I know you haven't followed, don't know about this Gideon Sar person, but from what I'm looking at, it's looking more and more likely that there's going to be some type of major invasion or escalation of some kind within the near future. Do you have the same feeling, or?
Well, there have been rumors to that effect for, at least a couple months now, even longer. I think it's clear that this is something that I think Netanyahu has wanted to do. Netanyahu and many of his allies. He does have a major problem. It's just there's something like, hear different numbers, but maybe 80,000 Israeli citizens have been moved out of northern Israel, because of the fighting that's taking place on the border there. Of course, the solution would be to achieve a ceasefire in Gaza, and that would end. But that's not Netanyahu's way. He obviously has no intention to have a ceasefire. He wants to do, he wants to destroy Hamas, and he wants to destroy Hezbollah too. That's now he doesn't seem capable of doing either. But this is still obviously his intention.
Okay. There's something else I want to ask you about. What's the deal with Ben-Gvir and this army that he has? Does he have like a proper army militia? Because I saw some videos of Ben-Gvir just handing out M16s to settlers. They're just lining up, and
right.
These guys are like a legit army now, right?
Yeah. They're right. It's part of what I was talking about earlier. It's just that there's always been this sort of this extremist fringe in Israel, but the settlement of the West Bank has just given them much more strength. These settlers go on rampages, and there may have initially been some attempts to really clamp down on it. I think even there were from time to time to rein them in, but these settler movements have grown larger and more extreme over time, and now clearly they've moved into the mainstream because they have Ben-Gvir as the security minister, if I'm not mistaken. So they have somebody right at the very top now. And he is. That's what I've heard. He has his own militia. I mean, we're seeing that. We saw a manifestation of that during that mob attack on the detention center to release the rapists. There are clearly growing fractures within Israeli society. These forces are for real. They can't replace the IDF, but who knows where we'll be in the long run.
Do you know how big this militia is? I heard like tens of thousands of
That sounds right.
now.
Yeah, I don't know the details. I'll have to admit, I just don't know the details.
And I guess they're mostly in the West Bank. If there's a settler army of Ben-Gvir.
Yeah.
in my mind, this is terrifying if you are living in the West Bank. We both have been to the West Bank. That all of a sudden you have there's 700,000 or so settlers living there. Now they're armed to the teeth, and they've already killed hundreds of Palestinians in the West Bank. It could be over 1,000 now. I don't know the exact.
Yeah.
They even killed an American citizen just a week ago, and I have a feeling the settler armor is going to be unleashed on the West Bank once all hell breaks loose. Like for example, when the invasion happens in Lebanon, and Iran gets involved, whatever, I think the settler army is going to be unleashed, and what they're going to do is cleanse the West Bank. That's what I'm thinking.
Yeah, no, there's a real danger of that. We'll see. I haven't seen signs. Again, typically what happens, and this has gone on for many, many years, is like the settlers will do something crazy. They're armed. But they'll kill Palestinians. They'll cut down their olive trees. They'll seize a spring or whatever. And if the Palestinians attempt to resist, they simply wreak more violence. And then if they need help, though, when they get themselves in a fix, the IDF comes and supports them. Mm-hmm. I mean, that's it. That's just sort of been the story. It's just the IDF is clearly on their side, and they know it. And, that's why they're there, and that's why they can behave with impunity.
Right.
Now, I haven't heard about any. I don't think there have been coordinated actions in the past, but you're right. It could happen. Like if it's clear that Netanyahu and his people, all these believers in the Greater Israel, which again is really most of Jewish Israel, they want to take the West Bank, and I'm sure that the settler and militias will play a role.
Yeah,
and they may do it in coordination with the IDF. We'll see.
No, it's scary. I'm just afraid that there's going to be some type of massacre. It's just an onslaught. I mean, the thing that's different about the West Bank as opposed to Gaza, like we said, is that the settlers are heavily embedded within the West Bank. So you can't just carpet bomb the West Bank like you're doing to Gaza. So what I'm thinking is more likely going to happen is that these settlers are going to rise up now that they're armed to the teeth with U.S. weaponry. They all have M16 assault rifles, and there's tens of thousands of them that are armed to the teeth, hundreds of thousands. And they might just pour into places like Hebron or Nablus or Ramallah and just commit massacre. I don't know. Maybe that's too far-fetched and extreme.
It's not too far-fetched. It's certainly possible. We'll see.
Okay, well, we won't speculate too much.
Yeah, it would be pure speculation, but it's certainly within the realm of possibility.
Okay, yeah, I was just seeing the videos of just settlers just at Ben Gvir, just here's an M16 for you, one for you, and I'm like, this is pretty
right.
Crazy,
I mean, like,
right?
What kind of country? Yeah, exactly. I mean, this is. It should be rather eye-opening. Again, the Americans always give their ironclad support to Israel, but scenes like that should really raise some eyebrows here.
Right. These are U.S. guns.
Right.
Why taxpayer money going to?
Say, well, wait a second. What kind of country are we supporting? Just like that whole, rape incident and the clear public support for it should have raised eyebrows. It just didn't get anywhere near the coverage that it should have. I mean, I think it was extremely revealing. There's clearly an effort to kind of draw the veil over Israel so that on the part of major news outlets like the New York Times and the Washington Post, they just will not let us. Occasionally something will get through, but then it's always said, well, every country has its problems and the Israelis are working on it. But, incidents like that tell you that, no, this is not a normal country. This is not just an incident. This is we're looking at, the terrifying face of the new Israel.
Mm-hmm. Right. Okay. Another question I have is about the Houthi missile strike. You saw this. From what I heard is that Yemen, the Houthis launched a missile from Yemen and it struck Israel in 15 minutes. And some people are saying that this was a hypersonic missile or a supersonic missile. Can you tell us about this attack, what it is, and if there's any significance to it?
Well, the Israelis said that it just came down in an empty area. The Houthis say that they hit a military facility. And I don't know what's true. I'll just say I don't know. I mean, it's still not clear to me what happened during that Hezbollah rocket attack, a few weeks ago. I think the Houthis claimed that they hit Unit 8200, 8200 in Tel Aviv, and that's my understanding. That's the equivalent of America's NSA, the National Security Agency. But the the Israelis are saying nothing about it. They won't allow any pictures. That's always been their policy. So we don't know, and it's not clear to me. But recently, there's something like some leaks. I don't know how real they are, but from actually like European intelligence said that, yeah, and indeed the Unit 8200 was hit and serious damage was done. So maybe it happened. We don't know. Now it's the same thing with this, it just, they say that it came down in an empty place, but then I know I saw video. It shows like some facility burning, and somebody actually like geolocated that to, some kind of like an oil refinery, some energy facility. So, who knows? It's just like the Israelis are going to hide what happens. I would say that no matter what, it's impressive. This missile traveled, we know at the very least, well over 1,000 miles to get there from Yemen. And it was a large missile. I don't think anybody's denying that. They said it took 11 and a half minutes, and therefore it was traveling at what, we would define as hypersonic speed. Now, I find that like hard to believe that the Houthis, when the U.S. can't develop hypersonic that Houthis did. I mean, maybe that's just not true. It took longer than 11 and a half minutes.
But it circumvented all Israeli air defense systems.
Yeah, no matter what, it clearly made it into Israel, and it was a major missile. So, I mean, it is something that's got to be kind of unnerving for the Israelis. And it may have done some real damage to some facilities there. I can't be 100% sure about that. But yeah, it has to be unnerving. If it was indeed hypersonic, then my guess was that it was supplied by the Iranians, possibly the Russians, something. But
yeah, I would assume the Iranians, maybe a Fatah 2 missile, but if the Houthis have hypersonic missiles, that's a game changer itself. I mean, they're the ones that are actively, they've closed the Red Sea.
Right.
If they are able to strike Israel like this with impunity, like the Houthis don't give a damn about anything,
right. Just the fact that they did this is a very dirt poor country, it's just that they can, better than 1,000 miles from Israel, that they can do this, even if this did come down in empty air. It just shows that Israel is vulnerable. And then they've got, Lebanon's right on their border, of course, Hezbollah is right there. And we don't know, saying that most recent attack, the Hezbollah said they used only tactical, rockets and missiles, and they didn't use any of their strategic, that they're reserving their, best ones for a future conflict. So yeah, if I were Israel, I would be worried, and maybe you really should pursue a ceasefire.
Yeah, well, that's not going to happen.
Yeah,
right. No. They're going to use this as an excuse that we got to strike now more than ever.
Right.
Yeah. Attack. Did you think that this Houthi missile attack changes the calculus at all? That it is a game changer in any way, or is it just?
I wouldn't say it's a game changer. It's just it kind of depends on, again, exactly what happened. If it in fact it hit, an important Israeli facility and did significant damage, that does have to affect their calculations. Even if it missed, it's got to kind of put them on notice that future missiles just might make that kind of, they may not be so lucky in future strikes from Yemen. I mean, you would think that in the past Israel never had to worry about Yemen. Now they do. I mean, it's just one more enemy that they've made. Mm-hmm. And again, you have to say they made it. I mean, the Yemenis are doing this because of the Gaza war. And if they ended the Gaza war, if they did, establish a ceasefire, they could solve their problems on all their borders. They, at least temporarily, but they won't.
What do you think's going on with Iran right now? Do you think that they're just? I don't think anybody thought it would be this long.
Right. Yeah. Well, I've heard I'll give you two different interpretations, two different takes on it. One is Scott Ritter, who's just saying that, look, Iran, they're realists, and their economy, after suffering severely under sanctions for many years, is finally turning the corner. They're finally starting to get growth, and that really matters to their people. People vote their pocketbook in Iran like they do in the U.S., and so the Iranians know that if they do retaliate in a significant way, they are risking a major war that would destroy, would do severe damage to their economy, and they're just not going to risk it. So yeah, they'll retaliate, but it may be years down the road. They just have no reason to risk it now. Now, you get a different take from, I believe his name is Mohammad Morandi, who, he's a professor at the University of Tehran. Speaks very good English. He actually spent some time in the U.S. It was kind of interesting. He was part of a dissident family, that fled to the U.S., but that was like under the Shah. And then when the Iranian Revolution happened, his family moved back to Israel.
To Iran.
Not to Israel, to Iran. Yeah, no, not to Israel. But he was saying, they definitely are going to retaliate. And then he made a point in general, which is sort of that is, which I think is really, I think it's right, in that we have to recognize, like in this axis of resistance, so-called, we're talking about Iran, we're talking about some Iraqi, like Shiite militias, Syria, Hezbollah, and the Houthis in Yemen. Okay, these are all parts of the axis of resistance. Okay, these are people that really are acting according to their beliefs and their principles. That they could all, he said, and I stop and think about it, I'm sure he's right about this, that actually the Americans have approached like Hezbollah and said, hey, if you just drop all this, if you drop your resistance to Israel and, you exit this axis of resistance, not only will we stop sanctioning you and, attacking you or supporting attacks on you, but, there will be huge monetary rewards. I bet that's true. And he says that that's actually just, you find all around, but these people have held to their guns and say, no, that's not who we are. We're not doing that. We're not, we're not, caving in. So, that suggests to me that, okay, they do understand there's a risk, but they just may do it because they feel they have to do it. That they can't continue to bow down to Israel. And, even if it does risk, wrecking this economy that is just starting to recover, they'll take that risk.
Okay. All right. Well, maybe we can end it there. There's a lot going on, lot moving, even if there aren't necessarily all-out war breaking out, there's a lot of moves behind the scenes. So
no, clearly there are a lot of things going on.
Yeah, there's a lot of too many things to pay attention to. I gotta take care of my kids.
Yeah.
Okay. All right, Dad. Well, any final words? Anything else you want to talk about? Or
no, that's fine. I think we covered a lot.
Okay. All right. Sounds good. All right. Thanks a lot, Dad. Have a great rest of your day.
Okay.